The November wind came straight off the lake, the kind that found every gap in your jacket and reminded you that Superior didn't care how many layers you wore. I stood on the deck of the Iron Promise, hands shoved deep in my pockets, watching gray water churn against the harbor pilings. Duluth spread out behind me, docks and warehouses and the grain elevators that had been there longer than I had. 12 years I'd been pulling wrecks from these depths, 12 years of recovery work, of documenting what went down and bringing up what the lake decided to give back. Started as a diver, worked my way to captain, bought the Promise when her previous owner retired south where water stayed liquid year-round. The work was steady. Ships went down. Insurance companies needed proof. We provided it. The deck shifted under my boots as a swell rolled through. I'd replaced these planks twice, patched the hull more times than I could count, but she was solid, reliable. That mattered more than comfort when you were working salvage in water cold enough to stop your heart in minutes. Footsteps on the gangway. I turned as Clementine came aboard, that clipboard tucked under one arm and a waterproof folder in her hand. Her glasses had fogged from the temperature change, and she pulled them off to wipe them on her fleece. "Got the briefing," she said. I took the folder. Heavy stock, the kind insurance companies used when they wanted you to know the job mattered. Northland Maritime Insurance stamped across the top in blue ink. What are we looking at? Research vessel, the Meridian Star. Clementine consulted her clipboard. Went down 3 weeks ago, November 3rd. 16 crew presumed dead. I flipped the folder open. Coordinates printed on the first page. A position about 40 miles northeast of here, deep water. Bathymetric charts on the next page showed the lake floor dropping to nearly 800 feet. Recovery depth, but not comfortable. The kind of dive where you watched your gauges and didn't take chances. "Presumed dead," I said. "They find any bodies?" "None recovered. Coast Guard did a surface search for 4 days, found debris and an oil slick, called it." She adjusted her glasses. "We're being hired for documentation and recovery of the main hull if feasible." I turned to the next page. Standard insurance forms, liability waivers, the usual paperwork that said if we died doing this, it wasn't their problem. Then the payment terms. That's where I stopped. "This is triple rate." "I know." "For documentation." I looked at her. "Not recovery, not salvage. They're paying us triple to take pictures and file reports." Clementine's expression didn't change, but I'd worked with her long enough to catch the tightness around her eyes. That's what the contract specifies. Something wasn't sitting right. Insurance companies didn't pay triple rate out of generosity. They paid it when the work was dangerous, when the timeline was critical, or when they needed it done quiet and fast. I flipped through the rest of the folder. More charts, equipment manifests for the Meridian Star, crew roster with 16 names I didn't recognize. Standard stuff. Then my thumb caught on something tucked behind the depth charts. A laminated card, smaller than the other documents, easy to miss if you weren't thorough. I pulled it free. Red ink on white cardstock, sealed in plastic. No header, no logo I recognized. Just 11 rules typed in a font that looked like it came from a typewriter, not a printer. Operational protocols. Meridian Star recovery. The first rule was straightforward enough. Maintain radio silence except for scheduled check-ins every 6 hours. I'd done silent ops before, usually when salvaging cargo someone didn't want advertised. Rule 2. Do not surface any objects bearing research station markings or identification codes. My jaw tightened. Research station. The Meridian Star was listed as a research vessel, but the insurance documents hadn't mentioned what kind of research or what station she was operating from. Rule 3. Document all findings via written log only. No digital transmission of reports until debriefing. Rule 4. No photographing of recovered crew remains. Facial documentation is prohibited. That one pulled me up short. In 12 years of recovery work, I'd brought up 14 bodies. Standard protocol was photographic documentation of everything: position, condition, identifying features. It was how you confirmed identity, how you gave families closure. Telling me not to photograph faces meant someone didn't want those crew identified through normal channels. Rule 5. If cargo hold is intact and sealed, do not attempt entry under any circumstances. Rule 6. Any biological samples or specimens are to be left in situ and coordinates reported. Biological samples, specimens. The word sat wrong, too clinical for standard maritime salvage. I kept reading, each rule tightening the knot in my gut. Rule 7. Equipment showing active power sources is to be marked, but not retrieved. Rule 8. All personnel must undergo medical examination within 12 hours of surfacing. Rule 9. Maintain minimum distance of 20 feet from any intact laboratory spaces. Laboratory spaces. On a research vessel in Lake Superior. Rule 10. Report any anomalous readings or unexplained phenomena immediately via encrypted channel, frequency attached. My thumb moved to the bottom of the card. Rule 11 was shorter than the others, just 2 sentences that made the temperature on deck feel 10 degrees colder. If recovered personnel display signs of life, do not attempt resuscitation. Contact emergency number immediately. I read it again, then a third time. 16 crew, 3 weeks underwater in November. Lake Superior this time of year was 38 degrees, maybe 40 on a warm day. Nobody survived 3 weeks in that. Nobody survived 3 hours. But someone thought they might. Someone thought it was possible enough to put it in the rules. Not as a hypothetical, not as a distant contingency, but as instruction 11 out of 11. The last thing they wanted me to remember before going down. My hand had gone tight on the card, creasing the laminate. I forced my fingers to relax. Clementine? She looked up from her clipboard. I held out the card. You see this? She took it, scanned the text. Her face went carefully neutral. The expression she used when dealing with bureaucrats or inspectors, when she was thinking hard and didn't want it to show. That's unusual, she said finally. That's goddamn disturbing. The medical examination requirement isn't unprecedented. Contamination protocols. Rule 11. She read it again. Didn't say anything. 3 weeks, I said. In 40-degree water. They've been down 3 weeks, Clem. I know. So why would they need a rule about signs of life? She handed the card back. I don't know. The wind gusted, bringing the smell of fish and diesel in winter coming on. Somewhere across the harbor, a crane groaned, loading containers onto a freighter that would make the run to Thunder Bay before the shipping lanes froze. I looked at the emergency number printed at the bottom of the card. No area code I recognized. 10 digits that would connect me to someone, somewhere, who expected I might find something alive in a wreck that had been on the lake floor for 21 days. We don't have to take it, Clementine said quietly. I flipped back to the payment terms. Triple rate. Enough to cover the promise's winter maintenance, and then some. Enough to keep Derek and the rest of the crew working through the slow season. Enough to make me overlook the fact that nothing about this job made sense. Check the weather, I said. If we've got a window tomorrow, we go. Clementine nodded once and headed back toward the cabin, her boots steady on the deck despite the swell. I stayed where I was, that laminated card still in my hand, reading Rule 11 one more time in the gray November light. If recovered personnel display signs of life, do not attempt resuscitation. The lake rolled dark beyond the harbor breakwater, keeping its secrets like it always had. Whatever was down there with the meridian star, someone was afraid I'd find it breathing. I left Harper's protocols sitting on the galley table where I'd dropped them. 14 pages of bureaucratic horseshit that treated salvage work like defusing a bomb. Derek found me there an hour later, coffee gone cold in my cup, staring at the highlighted sections Clementine had marked as critical compliance items. That bad? He pulled out the chair across from me, didn't wait for an invitation. They want us to treat the wreck site like it's contaminated. No direct contact with any recovered remains. Full hazmat protocols for anything from the cargo hold. I pushed the packet toward him. Get this, we're supposed to maintain 20 feet of separation from any bodies we locate. 20 feet. In 240 feet of water with limited visibility. Derek flipped through the pages, his expression shifting from curiosity to disbelief. They want us to abort if we observe unusual biological activity. The hell does that mean? Your guess is good as mine. He kept reading, that muscle in his jaw working the way it did when someone questioned his competence. 6 years we'd worked together, long enough that I could read his moods without him saying a word. He'd done Navy salvage work before going private, pulled bodies from flooded compartments in training accidents and real disasters both. Treated it with respect but not fear. Bodies were part of the job, tragic but manageable. This is paranoia. He set the packet down, tapped one finger on the hazmat section. 40-degree water, Lewis. Nothing survives down there. Whatever killed those crew members, it's long gone or it never existed in the first place. That's what I figure. They're covering their asses. Something went wrong on that ship, something they don't understand. So they're throwing regulations at it until it looks like they did their due diligence. He leaned back, crossed his arms. We've pulled bodies before. Never needed a goddamn hazmat team. I picked up my cold coffee, set it down again without drinking. Clementine thinks we should follow everything to the letter. Clementine's operations, not dive. She doesn't have to work in a suit with 20 extra pounds of gear that serves no purpose except checking boxes for some federal agent who's never been below 50 feet. Fair point. The hazmat additions would make the work harder, slower, more dangerous in their own way. Limited mobility, reduced visibility through the extra face shield, communications interference from the additional layers, all to protect us from bodies that had been sitting in near-freezing water for 8 months. So, what do you want to do? Derek asked. I pulled the packet back, found the section on ROV deployment. We run the ROV first. Standard procedure anyway. We always survey before sending divers down. We follow that part by the book, get a clear picture of what we're dealing with. And the rest? We use sense. Safety protocols that make sense, we follow. Decontamination procedures, fine. Careful handling of remains, absolutely. But I'm not aborting a dive because something moves in the current. And I'm not suiting you up like you're entering a reactor core. Derek nodded slowly. Reasonable guidelines, ignore the absurd ones. That's what they're paying us for, our expertise, our judgment. I closed the packet. Bodies don't resurrect in 40-degree water. Whatever happened on the Meridian Star, it's over. We're just documenting what's left. When do we deploy? First light tomorrow. Weather windows holding for the next 3 days. I stood, picked up my cup. Get the ROV prepped this afternoon. I want fresh batteries, full diagnostics on the camera system and the high-intensity lamps. 240 feet means we'll need all the light we can push. Copy that. Derek rose, grabbed the protocol packet. I'll give this another read. Pull out anything that's actually useful. Let me know what you find. He paused at the galley door. You tell Harper we're going selective compliance? I'll tell her we're following appropriate safety measures based on our professional assessment of actual site conditions. Derek grinned. Bureaucrats speak, you're learning. 30 years on the water teaches you how to navigate more than storms. The ROV went over the side at 0600, gray dawn light turning the harbor water to brushed steel. I'd run through the checklist twice, Derek handling the tether while I controlled the descent from the console we'd set up on deck. The screen glowed pale blue, showing murky water and the occasional fish darting through the frame. Clementine stood behind me, tablet in hand, documenting everything. She hadn't argued when I'd outlined our approach, just made notes and asked pointed questions about which specific protocols we were implementing. Smart enough to know when to push and when to let experience guide the call. "Passing 100 feet," Derek called out. "Tether's running clean." The pressure reading climbed steadily. Water temperature held at 41 degrees, visibility dropping as we descended beyond the thermocline. I adjusted the lamp intensity, pushed the ROV into a slow forward glide toward the coordinates where the meridian star had gone down. Side-scan sonar had already given us a position, but sonar couldn't tell you about structural damage, couldn't show you if the wreck was stable or if it had broken apart on impact with the bottom. That's what the ROV was for. Eyes and cameras where human bodies couldn't go yet, not until we knew what we were sending Derek into. 150, Derek said. The water darkened to charcoal, then black. Our lamps cut through it in narrow cones, illuminating suspended particles that drifted like snow. I kept the ROV's descent steady, watching the depth gauge and the sonar return that was growing more solid on the screen. "Contact," I said. "Getting visual." The meridian star materialized out of the darkness like a ghost ship, sitting upright on the lakebed as if it had simply decided to park there and wait. The hull loomed in the camera frame, dark metal plating streaked with fresh rust but otherwise intact. No catastrophic breach, no twisted wreckage field, just a ship that had settled to the bottom and stayed put. 240 feet, Derek confirmed. She looked stable. I piloted the ROV along the port side, cameras recording every detail. The deck rails stood undamaged, cargo cranes still secured in their housings. A few loose items, a life ring, some coiled rope, had shifted, but nothing suggested violent sinking. The ship looked more abandoned than destroyed. "Bringing her around to starboard," I said. That's where the Coast Guard report had noted the damage. And sure enough, there it was. A ragged tear in the hull, plating about 20 feet back from amidships, edges bent inward like something had punched through from outside. The tear was maybe 6 feet across, big enough to flood the lower compartments, but not catastrophic enough to sink the ship immediately. Clementine leaned closer. "Can you get the camera inside?" "Working on it." I maneuvered the ROV toward the tear, adjusting the lamp angles. The interior showed dark compartments, debris floating in the still water. Equipment, furniture, personal items drifting in the current the ROV's thrusters created. No bodies visible, but we'd expected that. The crew quarters were forward and above, not in this section. Then I brought the ROV up and over, heading toward the main cargo hold. The doors stood open. I stopped the ROV's forward motion, held position about 30 feet out. The cargo hold doors were massive things, hydraulic-operated hatches that sealed tight to keep weather out and cargo secure. They didn't just swing loose. They had to be unlocked, powered open, deliberately released. "That's wrong," Derek said. "Yeah. Those should be sealed. Even if the ship was taking water, those doors have independent systems. They wouldn't just pop open on impact." I moved the ROV closer, bringing the camera to bear on the door mechanism itself. The locking clamps sat in their open position, retracted fully, not damaged, not broken, released. Clementine's stylus tapped against her tablet, rapid, nervous rhythm. Could the crew have opened them? Maybe trying to jettison cargo to stay afloat? Maybe, but it didn't track. You didn't open your cargo hold when you were sinking. You sealed everything tight, tried to maintain whatever buoyancy you had left. Derek voiced what I was thinking. "Looks like someone opened them from inside, after she settled." Can't be. But I stared at the screen, at those deliberately retracted clamps, and couldn't find another explanation that fit the evidence. I pushed the ROV forward, bringing it to the threshold of the cargo hold. The lamps penetrated maybe 20 feet into the darkness before the black water swallowed the light. Cargo containers sat secured to the deck, their outlines barely visible, empty space between them where loading paths ran. Something moved in that darkness. Just a flicker at the edge of the lamp's reach, there and gone before I could process what I'd seen. I stopped the ROV, held it steady. "You catch that?" Derek asked. "Replay it." He worked the controls for the recording system, backing up the footage, 10 seconds. We watched the screen as the ROV approached the cargo hold, as the lamps pushed into the interior space. There, motion in the background, behind one of the containers. Something pale drifting across the gap. "Current," Clementine said. "Moving debris." I backed up the footage again, advanced it frame by frame. The pale shape moved through the frame in 3 seconds of footage, maybe 15 individual frames. I isolated the clearest one, enhanced the image resolution as much as our system allowed. Not debris. The shape had limbs, arms and legs, a torso, a head, humanoid. But the proportions were wrong, the joints bending at angles that human anatomy didn't allow. It drifted past the cargo hold entrance, pale as drowned flesh, its movement too deliberate for simple current. And it was retreating from our lights. I watched it 3 more times, that thing pulling back into the darkness away from the ROV's lamps. Intentional, purposeful, aware. Derek's hand gripped the edge of the console, knuckles white. "Tell me that's a body. Tell me that's just one of the crew and the currents moving it strange." I couldn't. Bodies didn't move away from light sources. Bodies didn't retreat with purpose. Bodies didn't have limbs that bent wrong. The ROV's camera stared into the cargo hold darkness, recording nothing but black water and the faint outlines of secured containers. Whatever I'd just seen, it had gone deeper into the ship, away from our observation. Waiting. I should have called it off right there. That's what the protocols said. What common sense demanded. What 42 years of life, 20 of them on the water, should have taught me about trusting my gut when something felt wrong. But Derek was already suited up, tanks checked, helmet sealed. The Iron Promise rolled gentle in the swell, conditions as good as we'd get this time of year. And I kept thinking about that shape moving through the Meridian Star's interior, about Harper's warnings that felt more like threats, about 3 weeks of wondering what the hell was down there. "Send you down," I said. Derek's grin split his face, visible through the helmet faceplate. "Now we're talking." 30 minutes max. First sign of trouble, you surface. I don't care if you're 2 feet from something interesting. Copy that, Captain. Clementine worked the winch controls, her jaw set tight. She hadn't said a word since I'd made the call, but I could read the disapproval in every rigid line of her shoulders. Derek went over the side clean. No hesitation. The tether played out smooth while I watched his shape descend through the gray-green water, getting smaller, darker, gone. I moved to the monitor setup we'd rigged in the wheelhouse. 2 feeds, Derek's helmet cam and the ROV we'd sent down first as a guide. The screens showed murky water, sediment stirred by Derek's descent, the ghost outline of the wreck emerging from the gloom below. Depth at 40 feet, Derek's voice came through clear on the comms. Visibility about 15. Copy. How's the current? Manageable. Getting some pull from the northeast, but nothing I can't handle. The Meridian Star took shape on the monitors, lying on her side like she'd just decided to rest. Her hull showed impact damage along the port side, the reef that had opened her up and sent her down. But the structure looked intact otherwise. No major breaching beyond the initial wound. Derek approached the cargo access hatch we'd identified on the ROV pass. The opening gaped black against the ship's white paint, a mouth leading into darkness. "Beginning entry," Derek said. Then his voice changed. "Lewis, you seeing this?" I leaned closer to the monitor. The helmet cam showed Derek's hand reaching toward the hatch frame, his dive light cutting through the murk. But there was something else illuminating the corridor beyond. A faint glow, pale blue-green, coming from inside the flooded ship. "What am I looking at?" My hand found the comm button, pressed hard. The interior, it's lit up. It's not possible. But I was staring right at it. The corridor beyond the hatch glowed with that eerie, bioluminescent shimmer, bright enough to see by even without Derek's torch. Yeah, well. Derek pushed through the opening, pulling himself hand over hand along what had been the corridor's wall, now the floor with the ship on her side. Possible or not, I got light down here. Clementine appeared at my shoulder. Flooded generators don't work. I know. 3 weeks underwater, no power, no... I know. The helmet cam showed Derek moving deeper into the ship, his movements efficient and controlled despite the wrongness of what we were seeing. The glow intensified as he progressed, painting the corridor in shades of aquamarine and deeper blue. It didn't flicker or pulse, just a steady, impossible radiance emanating from the walls themselves. Not light fixtures, not emergency strips or chemical glow sticks. The walls. The metal surfaces of the Meridian star's interior glowed with their own light, uniform, and constant. This is some kind of algae bloom, Derek said, but his voice carried doubt. Bioluminescent bacteria, maybe. In 3 weeks? Coating every surface? I watched his gloved hand brush against the corridor wall. The glow didn't change, didn't smear or cloud the water. That's not bacteria. Then what is it? I didn't have an answer. Just that feeling in my gut getting stronger, louder, screaming at me to pull him out. Derek reached a junction, hesitated. Cargo hold should be through that hatch port side. Copy. He maneuvered through the opening, moving from what had been a corridor into the larger space beyond. The helmet cam struggled with the sudden expansion, auto-adjusting exposure to compensate for the increased light. When the image stabilized, I stopped breathing. The cargo hold stretched out before Derek's camera, cavernous and wrong. Row after row of cylindrical tanks, each one maybe 8 feet tall and 3 wide, arranged in neat lines across the deck. Most of them had ruptured. Metal peeled back from the inside, glass observation ports shattered outward, fragments glittering in the blue-green glow. But 3 tanks stood intact in the center row. 3 sealed cylinders with observation windows still whole, still showing what floated inside. Jesus Christ, Derek whispered. The things in those tanks had been human once. You could see it in the basic structure. 2 arms, 2 legs, a head. But Superior had changed them the way pressure and darkness changed everything that went deep enough. Their skin had gone translucent, revealing the shadow of organs and bones beneath. Limbs elongated, fingers webbed, joints bending in directions that made my eyes hurt. Their faces were worst, stretched. Eyes too large, pupils blown wide and black, mouths that opened too far, showing too many teeth. Adapted, I thought. Not drowned, not dead and rotting. Adapted. Lewis, Derek's voice had gone tight. What the fuck am I looking at? I don't know. My throat felt like I'd swallowed sand. Get samples if you can, but don't... The middle tank's occupant opened its eyes. Black on black, pupils indistinguishable from iris, but the movement was unmistakable. Eyelids peeling back, gaze focusing, head turning with liquid grace to track Derek's position. Then it smiled. Surface. The word came out flat, final. Derek, surface now. Copy, The comms dissolved into static, a wall of white noise that made me rip the headset away from my ear. On the monitors, Derek's helmet cam showed nothing but scrambled pixels, the image breaking apart into digital artifacts. Derek! I jammed my finger against the comm button, holding it down. Derek, respond! Nothing but static. I switched to the ROV feed. That camera still worked, positioned 20 feet above and behind Derek's last known location. The image quality was shit. The ROV's lighting couldn't compete with that impossible glow, but I could make out shapes, movement. Derek swimming for the hatch. Fast, controlled. The training kicking in even through whatever panic he must be feeling. The tanks behind him. 2 still sealed. The middle one. Empty. The observation window showed nothing but circulating fluid, the thing that had been inside gone. "Clementine, get on the winch. Soon as he clears the wreck, haul him up fast as you can." She was already moving, boots pounding across the deck. Through the wheelhouse window, I saw her reach the controls, hands flying over the switches. The ROV feed showed Derek reach the corridor, pull himself through with powerful strokes. The helmet cam stayed dead, just static and occasional fragments of image too broken to parse. I kept my eyes on the ROV monitor. Watched Derek navigate back through that glowing corridor, heading for the exit hatch. Watched the empty space behind him, waiting for something to emerge from the cargo hold. The water around Derek had started to darken. Not sediment, not shadow. The glow was fading, that impossible light dimming like someone had their hand on a switch, turning it down slow and steady. By the time Derek reached the exterior hatch, the Meridian Star's interior had gone completely black. He cleared the opening, kicked hard for the surface. The ROV tracked his ascent, bubbles streaming from his regulator, tether playing out above him. I ran for the deck. Clementine had the winch going full speed, the motor whining with the strain. The tether came up fast, dripping, trailing water across the Iron Promise's deck. Derek broke the surface 30 yards out, arm raised. I could see him swimming toward us, movements strong and controlled. Then he stopped. Just hung there in the water, one arm up, body suddenly motionless. "Derek!" I leaned over the rail, cupped my hands. "Derek, swim!" He didn't respond, didn't move. The tether kept pulling him closer, but his body stayed limp in the water, face down now, limbs trailing. Clementine swore, constant and creative, hands locked on the winch controls. I grabbed a boat hook, leaned out as far as I dared, waiting for Derek to come into range. The helmet cam flickered back to life on the monitor inside the wheelhouse. I could see it through the window, the screen showing a perfect, clear image for the first time since the static hit. It showed the interior of Derek's helmet, and the water flooding in through the broken seal at his neck. The helmet camera cleared for just a second, long enough to see Derek thrashing toward the cargo hold exit, arms churning water in strokes I'd watched him make 1,000 times. Practiced, efficient movements that had pulled him through Navy training and 6 years of commercial dives. Not panicked, purposeful. The screen flickered again, static eating the edges of the frame, but I could still make out his silhouette against the faint illumination from his helmet lamp. Moving fast, making for the corridor that led back to the hull breach, back to open water, back to us. My hand found the radio transmit button. "Derek, talk to me. You're still broadcasting. Tell me what's happening." Nothing but the hiss of dead air and the clicking that had started when the seal broke. On screen, Derek's lamp swept the corridor ahead. Metal walls scored with rust, that same strange corrosion pattern we'd seen on the exterior hull. The beam caught something at the edge of the passageway. Movement. Derek stopped swimming. Just stopped, hanging there in the water column with his arms spread slightly, legs drifting behind him in the current. "Derek," I kept my voice level. "Keep moving. Don't stop." The clicking sounds intensified. Pressure waves. I could see them now, distorting the water around him in rippling patterns that the camera barely caught. Not random, rhythmic, deliberate. 4 shapes emerged from the corridor ahead. Pale forms that moved with the fluid grace of things born to deep water. They'd looked vaguely human from a distance, through bad camera angles and worse lighting. Up close, with Derek's helmet lamp illuminating them full on, there was nothing vague about it. They had been human. I could see the basic architecture still there. Head, torso, limbs arranged in familiar configuration. But everything else had changed. Skin gone translucent and colorless, showing the darker structures beneath. Arms elongated, fingers webbed and tipped with something that wasn't quite nail and wasn't quite claw. Legs fused partially together, ending in broad flukes that propelled them through the water with minimal effort. Their faces. Christ. Eyes enlarged and lidless, adapted for the absolute dark of deep water. Noses reduced to slits. Mouths wider than they should be, showing too many teeth when they opened to emit those clicking sounds, but still recognizable as faces, still carrying the ghost of human expression in the way their features moved. Jesus fuck. Clementine's voice came from somewhere behind me, barely above a whisper. I couldn't respond, couldn't look away from the screen. The four things circled Derek slowly, staying just outside arm's reach, moving in synchronized patterns that suggested communication, coordination, intelligence. Derek hung motionless in the center of their circle. His breathing came harsh through the compromised helmet seal, audible through the speaker despite the static. Fast, shallow pulls of air that fogged his faceplate. But he wasn't struggling anymore. The clicking intensified. I watched the pressure waves ripple through the water, distorting the image at regular intervals. The creatures moved closer, tightening the circle. One of them extended a webbed hand toward Derek's helmet. I hit the transmit button. Derek, get the fuck out of there. Swim. Now. He didn't move. The creature's hand made contact with his helmet, fingers splaying across the faceplate. The clicking changed pitch, dropping to a lower frequency that I felt more than heard through the speakers. A thrumming that set my teeth on edge and made something primitive in my brainstem scream warnings. The other three moved in, surrounding him completely now, bodies undulating in the current, all of them touching some part of his suit, his helmet, his tanks. The pressure waves synchronized, built on each other, created patterns in the water that the camera registered as geometric distortions in the frame. They were communicating. Not with us. With Derek. I realized I was gripping the monitor housing hard enough to hurt. Clementine stood frozen beside me, one hand covering her mouth. Through the window, I could see the lake surface, dark water rolling under gray sky. 200 feet below us in the drowned cargo hold of the Meridian Star, something was happening that shouldn't be possible. The static cleared, all at once, like someone had flipped a switch. The image went crystal sharp, clearer than it had been since Derek entered the wreck. I could see individual rust flakes drifting in the water, the texture of the creature's translucent skin, the precise geometry of their webbed fingers where they pressed against Derek's helmet. And I could see his face through the faceplate, calm, absolutely calm. The panic gone from his eyes, replaced by something I couldn't name. His breathing had slowed, steadied. He hung in the water with the four creatures surrounding him, and he looked peaceful. Lewis. His voice came through clear and steady, no static, no distortion, just Derek, speaking in the measured tone he used when he was working through a problem. I need you to listen. Don't interrupt. Just listen. My thumb found the transmit button. Derek, we're getting you out. Stay calm. They're not hurting me. His eyes stayed fixed on something beyond the camera's view. One of the creatures, maybe. Or all of them. They're trying to explain. They've been trying since I entered the cargo hold, but I couldn't understand, couldn't hear properly. The clicking continued, softer now, gentle pressure waves that barely registered on camera. They were the research team, Derek said. Dr. Sarah Chen, Marcus Whitfield, Jennifer Park, Thomas Brennan, all four of them. They found something in the samples they pulled from the deep trench. An organism. Microscopic. Lives in the pressure zones where nothing else can survive. I watched one of the creatures, Chen, Whitfield, Park, Brennan, what did the names matter now, tilt its head in a gesture that was almost human. Almost. It changes you, Derek continued. His voice held no fear. That scared me more than anything else. Rewrites your biology from the inside out. Adapts you for the deep water, the cold, the pressure. They didn't know what it would do at first. Not until it was too late to stop. Derek, I kept my voice level. Listen to me. Whatever they're telling you, it's irreversible. He talked over me like I hadn't spoken. Once it starts, the change completes. Takes about 72 hours. They tried to surface, tried to get help, but the transformation was too far along. So they made a choice. The creatures pulled back slightly, giving him space, still surrounding him but no longer touching. Their lidless eyes reflected his helmet lamp, throwing back pale crescents of light. They chose to finish it, Derek said. Came back down here where the pressure helps, where the cold slows their metabolism enough that they can think clearly. They've been living in the Meridian Star for 3 months. Waiting. My hand stayed frozen on the transmit button. Behind me, I heard Clementine's sharp intake of breath, but I couldn't turn to look at her. Couldn't take my eyes off the screen. They want to go deeper, Derek said. There are cavern systems in the trench, places where the organism thrives, where others like them can survive. But they need help, need equipment, supplies. They were trying to signal the research station when the ship went down. One of the creatures moved closer to him again, extended both hands in a gesture that looked like offering, like invitation. Derek, you're not making sense. I forced the words out. The seal broke on your helmet. You're getting contaminated water in your air supply. We need to bring you up before... It's already in me, Lewis. The words hit like a gut punch. Derek's eyes finally found the camera, found me 200 feet above him in the Iron Promises cabin. His expression stayed calm, too calm. The expression of a man who'd already made his decision. Happened when the seal broke, he said. Maybe before. They're in the water here, microscopic. Billions of them. I've been breathing them for the past 15 minutes. It's already started. No. The word came out flat. Certain. Denial wrapped in a captain's voice. We're bringing you up. Medical team can... There's no stopping it. Still that terrible calm. But it's not fatal. That's what they wanted me to understand. Chen, Whitfield, Park, Brennan, they're still themselves, still conscious, still thinking and feeling and choosing. Just different. Adapted. The creatures moved in their slow circle, bodies undulating in synchronized rhythm. The clicking continued its gentle pattern, pressure waves building and fading. They want you to join us, Derek said. The world narrowed to the screen in front of me, to Derek's calm face behind the flooded faceplate, to the 4 pale shapes circling him in the drowned cargo hold. They've been alone too long, he continued. Need others who understand, who can help them survive. They chose this, Lewis. Made the decision consciously. And now I'm choosing it too. Derek, you could choose it too. Come down here. Let the change happen. We could explore the deep trenches together, places no one has ever seen. Build something new down where the pressure keeps the rest of the world away. His hand reached out toward the camera, toward me. The gesture of a friend extending an invitation. Join us. The words hung in the speaker's silence. The clicking sounds continued their rhythmic pattern, gentle and insistent. The 4 creatures watched Derek with their enlarged eyes, and Derek watched me through the camera. And 200 feet of cold, superior water separated us. Rule 11 finally made sense. Emergency number to be called without hesitation in the event of anomalous biological exposure. I'd thought it was about resuscitation, about getting medical help fast when something went wrong on a dive. But Harper had been specific about the language, containment, quarantine protocols. The whole briefing focused on keeping something isolated, keeping it from spreading, not keeping divers safe, keeping everyone else safe from what the divers might bring back. The protocols hadn't been paranoia. They'd been preparation. Every rule I'd dismissed as bureaucratic overcaution had been written by people who knew exactly what was down there, who knew what the research team had found, what they'd become, who knew it could spread. The suit inspection requirements, the decontamination procedures, the sealed sample containers, and the prohibition on bringing anything back without clearance. All of it designed to prevent exactly what had just happened to Derek. Exposure. Infection. Transformation. I thought about Harper's face across the table in that windowless room. The careful way she'd explained each rule, watching for my reaction. She'd known. They'd all known. The government had sent us here not to salvage cargo or recover bodies, but to assess whether the contamination could be contained, whether the research team was still down there, whether they were still human. And we'd given them the answer. Derek had given them the answer, swimming into that cargo hold without understanding what was waiting. Now he was breathing the organism with every pull of contaminated air through his broken seal, and in 72 hours he'd be like the others. Pale, adapted, changed into something that could survive in the crushing dark of Superior's deepest trenches. My friend of 6 years looked at me through the camera with calm eyes and offered me the same choice. I reached for the transmit button. My hand stopped halfway. Derek was already lost, had been lost the moment that seal broke. Maybe before, when the first microscopic organisms entered his breathing mixture. The change was happening inside him right now, rewriting his biology cell by cell, and nothing I said or did would stop it. In 72 hours, Derek Lee would cease to exist, and something else would be wearing his shape. I should have fought harder to save him. That's what I told myself later, in the quiet hours when sleep wouldn't come. That I should have found another way, some angle I hadn't considered, some protocol Harper's people had buried in those 14 pages that would have brought Derek up alive and human. But standing there in the galley with Clementine's face white as paper and Derek's helmet camera showing lake water pouring through his broken seal, I knew the truth. He was already gone. Clementine. My voice came out steady. Decades of making calls under pressure, of staying calm when storms turned the lake into a killing floor. Trigger the emergency beacon. Her hand froze halfway to the radio. Lewis, do it now. She stared at me. Behind her glasses, those hazel eyes searched my face for something. Doubt, maybe. Hesitation. Some sign that I hadn't just made the choice we both knew I was making. I gave her nothing. Her fingers found the switch. The beacon activated with a high-pitched whine that made my teeth ache, broadcasting our position and distress code across every maritime frequency within 200 miles. Get topside, I said. Tell the deck crew to cut the line. Lewis, he's still down there. I know where he is. The words came out harder than I meant. Clementine flinched, and something in my chest twisted, but I couldn't afford softness now. Couldn't afford to explain what we'd both seen on that screen. Derek's face behind the flooded faceplate, eyes still open, still aware, still breathing water that shouldn't have let him breathe at all. She went. I stayed in the galley watching the monitor. Derek had stopped thrashing. The camera showed him drifting in the cargo hold darkness, suspended in black water, arms floating at his sides. Peaceful, almost. The way bodies looked after they'd given up fighting, except his chest kept moving. Slow, rhythmic expansions that had nothing to do with holding breath or final convulsions. He was adapting. The thing Harper had warned me about, the contamination she'd buried in clinical language and procedural guidelines, it was happening right now, 70 feet below my deck. Rewriting Derek cell by cell, turning him into something that belonged down there in the cold and the dark. I reached for the radio. My hand shook. Just once. Just a tremor I could blame on the cold, if anyone asked. Deck crew, this is Sullivan. Cut the dive line. Static crackled. Then Tommy's voice, young and uncertain. Captain, Derek's still on it. I know. Cut it. But that's an order. Silence. Long enough that I thought he might refuse, might force me to go up there and do it myself. Then the radio clicked off. Through the hull, I felt more than heard the vibration of the winch releasing, the dive line spooling out, dropping free, taking Derek's tether to the surface with it, leaving him down there alone. I killed the monitor before I could watch him realize what I'd done. The helicopters came in low across the water, black against the gray afternoon sky. 4 of them. No markings, no registration numbers visible even through the binoculars I'd trained on their approach. They moved in formation, precise and practiced, and somewhere in my gut I'd known they'd be this fast. Harper's people didn't fuck around when containment was on the line. I stood on deck watching them circle the Iron Promise, rotors beating the air into submission. The crew had gathered behind me. Clementine, Tommy, Marcus, the handful of others who'd been topside when everything went to hell. Nobody spoke. We just watched government power descend on us in rotor wash and exhaust fumes. The first helicopter didn't land. It hovered 20 feet off our starboard side while rappelling lines dropped from its belly. 4 figures in black tactical gear descended in synchronized precision, boots hitting deck with barely a sound despite the weight of their equipment. The second helicopter peeled off toward the dive site. I watched it position itself directly above where we'd dropped Derek, rotors churning the lake surface into white foam. Divers went over the side in full hazmat gear, tanks strapped to their backs, tethers secured to winches I recognized as military-grade recovery equipment. They weren't there to save him. They were there to contain whatever he'd become. The tactical team spread across my deck without asking permission, securing positions like they owned the vessel. Maybe they did now. One of them, broad-shouldered, face hidden behind a black mask, approached with the kind of confidence that came from knowing nobody would tell him no. "Captain Sullivan, we're taking command of this vessel. Your crew will remain on deck until debriefing is complete." Not a question, not a request. Understood. He tilted his head slightly, like he'd expected more resistance. Then he turned and started barking orders into his radio, coordinating the teams already moving through the Iron Promise's interior. Clementine moved closer to me. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "Lewis, what's happening?" Exactly what Harper said would happen. "Derek is gone." The words tasted like ash. True, though. Had been true since the moment that helmet seal broke, maybe since before that, since he'd entered the cargo hold and breathed air that shouldn't have been there. I'd just made it official. 2 unmarked vessels arrived within the hour, sleek government craft that made the Iron Promise look like a bathtub toy. They flanked us port and starboard, close enough that I could see figures moving behind tinted windows, carrying equipment I didn't recognize and didn't want to. The sun was dropping toward the horizon when Harper Montgomery stepped onto my deck. She looked exactly like she had in the video briefing. Sharp black bob, dark eyes that revealed nothing, tactical jacket that probably cost more than my monthly fuel budget. She moved through the organized chaos of her response teams without acknowledging them, heading straight for where I stood by the wheelhouse. "Captain Sullivan." "Agent Montgomery." She gestured toward the galley. "We need to talk." I followed her inside. The space felt smaller with her in it, her presence somehow taking up more room than her slim frame should have occupied. She settled into the chair where Clementine had sat hours ago, pulled a tablet from her jacket, and tapped it alive. "I need to see the footage." I'd already queued it up, had watched it 4 more times while waiting for her arrival, looking for some detail I'd missed, some sign that I'd made the wrong call. Found nothing but confirmation. Harper's face stayed blank as she watched Derek's camera feed. The static, the impossible breathing, the water flooding his helmet, his body drifting in the cargo hold darkness, with his chest still moving in rhythmic expansions that had nothing to do with being human. When it finished, she set the tablet down with careful precision. "You cut his line." "Yes." Before he stopped transmitting. "Yes." She studied me, not with judgment exactly, more like she was cataloging my responses, filing them away in whatever mental database she maintained on people who'd seen too much. "Walk me through your decision-making process." So I did. Told her about the protocols she'd sent, about Derek suiting up despite my concerns, about the static and the breathing and the thing we'd seen moving in the hold, about the moment his seal broke and I knew, really knew, that bringing him up would mean bringing something else with him. Harper listened without interrupting, took notes on her tablet with quick, efficient taps. When I finished, she asked 3 questions. Did anyone else review the footage? No, just me and Clementine. Did Derek make contact with the cargo? I don't know. The static hit before he got close. Did you see any identifying marks on the entity in the hold? Entity. Clinical word for something that had no business existing. No, just movement. Shadow, maybe. Could have been debris. We both knew I was lying about that last part. She didn't call me on it. Instead, she pulled something from her jacket. An envelope, cream-colored and official-looking, with a weight to it that had nothing to do with paper. She set it on the table between us. The recovery team found Derek's suit approximately 90 feet from the Meridian Star. Empty, no body, no biological material, no indication of what happened after you severed the line. Empty. Jesus Christ. The official report will list Derek Lee as a diving accident victim. Equipment failure at depth, body unrecoverable due to extreme conditions and structural instability of the wreck site. Harper's voice stayed flat, professional, like she was reading a grocery list instead of erasing a man's existence. The site is now classified. The Meridian Star and surrounding area are off limits to all civilian salvage operations indefinitely. And my crew will be debriefed individually and offered compensation for their cooperation and discretion. She tapped the envelope. This is yours. I didn't touch it. How much? Enough to retire comfortably. Sell the iron promise if you want, or keep her docked and never take another job. Your choice. And if I talk, you won't. Not a threat, just a statement of fact, delivered with the same clinical precision she'd used for everything else. She was right, though. Where would I talk? Who would I tell? Derek's family deserved to know what happened to him, deserved something more than equipment failure and unrecoverable remains. But what would I give them? The truth. That their son had been taken by something in the deep, transformed into God knows what, and that I'd cut him loose to save everyone else? That the government had cleaned up the mess and paid me to forget it ever happened? Some truths were worse than lies. I picked up the envelope. Heavier than I'd expected. The kind of heavy that came from guilt and blood money and choices you couldn't take back. Derek was a good diver, I said. 6 years, never missed a safety check, never took stupid risks. I'm sure he was. His family should know that. Harper stood, smoothing her jacket with practiced efficiency. The official notification will emphasize his professionalism and experience, that the equipment failure was unforeseeable, and that he followed all protocols. Protocols. The word tasted bitter. She moved toward the door, then paused. For the first time since boarding, something almost human flickered across her face. Not quite sympathy, more like recognition. You made the right call, Captain Sullivan. It doesn't feel like it now. Probably won't for a long time. But you saved your crew and prevented a containment breach that would have cost significantly more lives. That's supposed to make me feel better. No, it's supposed to be the truth. She left without waiting for a response. I sat alone in the galley, envelope in my hands, listening to her teams dismantle my dive operation and secure the site where I'd left Derek to whatever fate awaited things that stopped being human. The check inside was for $2,300,000. I didn't open it again for 6 months. They cleared out before midnight, taking their helicopters and unmarked vessels and tactical teams with them. Left the Iron Promise floating in dark water with her dive equipment seized as evidence and her captain sitting in the wheelhouse with blood money in his pocket. Clementine found me there around 0200. She'd been debriefed, signed her own stack of non-disclosure agreements, accepted her own envelope with the same numb silence I'd managed. "They're calling it equipment failure," she said. "I know. Derek checked that seal himself 3 times. "I know." She stood in the doorway, backlit by the running lights, and I could see her hands shaking, just slightly. The kind of tremor you got when adrenaline finally wore off and left you with nothing but the weight of what you'd witnessed. Did we do the right thing? I'd been asking myself the same question for 8 hours. Still didn't have an answer that felt true. We did the only thing. That's not the same. No, it's not. She left after that, took her severance pay and her silence and moved to Minneapolis, got a job managing logistics for a trucking company. Last I heard, she was doing fine. Never went near the water again. I kept the Iron Promise docked for 3 years. Told myself I was doing maintenance, waiting for the right contract, taking time to consider my options. Really, I just couldn't bring myself to go back out there. Eventually sold her to a salvage outfit in Thunder Bay. They renamed her, stripped her down, rebuilt her into something that didn't carry ghosts in her galley and blood on her deck. The money sits in an account I barely touch. Retirement fund, the bank calls it. I call it the price of knowing when to cut the line. Derek Lee died on November 18th in a diving accident. Equipment failure at depth, body unrecoverable. That's what the Coast Guard report says. That's what his family was told. That's what goes in the maritime safety databases as a cautionary tale about the dangers of deep salvage work. The truth stays classified, buried under Harper Montgomery's protocols and government containment procedures and $2 million of silence. Some nights I still see his helmet camera feed, the water flooding in, his chest still moving, his body adapting to something that shouldn't exist. And I remember that the last thing I did for my friend was leave him 70 feet down in the cold and the dark, alone with whatever he was becoming. That's the truth I carry, the one I'll never speak aloud. The paperwork took 3 weeks. Lawyers, accountants, meetings in offices that smelled like carpet cleaner and burnt coffee. I sold Sullivan Maritime to a holding company out of Milwaukee for less than it was worth and didn't try to negotiate up. They wanted the boats, the equipment, the contracts. Fine, take it all. I kept my mouth shut through the closing, signed where they pointed, deposited the check without looking at the numbers. The buyer's rep asked if I had plans for retirement, what I'd do with my time now. I told him I hadn't thought that far ahead. Truth was, I'd thought about nothing else since I watched Derek disappear into Superior's depths. The Iron Promise went with the sale. Last time I stood on her deck was a gray afternoon in early December, wind cutting across the harbor with that particular bite that meant winter had settled in for real. I ran my hand along the rail where I'd gripped it 1,000 times, felt the cold metal under my palm, the worn spots where paint had rubbed away to bare steel. Clementine had already taken another position, operations manager for a shipping outfit working the southern lakes. Michigan, Huron. Warmer waters, she'd said when she told me. Safer runs. She didn't say what we both knew, that she couldn't work Superior anymore either. We'd had coffee the week before, one of those awkward meetings where neither of us wanted to talk about what happened, but couldn't talk about anything else. She'd asked if I was okay. I'd lied and said yes. She'd nodded, not believing me, and we'd finished our drinks in silence. I walked off the Iron Promise that December afternoon and never went back. But I couldn't leave it behind. Not really. Nights were the worst. I'd moved into a small place inland, 2-bedroom rental in a neighborhood where I didn't know anyone and nobody asked questions. Far enough from the lake that I couldn't smell the water or hear the foghorns. I thought distance would help. It didn't. I'd lie there in the dark and hear Derek's voice, not the panicked transmission when his helmet started flooding, not the desperate gasps when the water poured in. The other voice, the calm one, the one that came after when something else was speaking through his mouth. The cold doesn't hurt anymore, Captain. That's what got me. The way he'd said it. Not scared, not fighting, just explaining, sharing a discovery. The pressure feels like an embrace. I'd tried to block it out, tried to fill my head with other thoughts, other sounds, television noise, radio static, anything. But 3 a.m, when the house went quiet and sleep wouldn't come, I'd hear him again. The depths offer something the surface never could. I didn't know what he'd meant, didn't want to know. But the words stayed with me, playing on repeat in the spaces between heartbeats. Derek had been my friend for 6 years. I'd trusted him with my life, with my crew, with salvage operations that could kill you if someone made a single mistake. And I'd left him down there. Harper had called it the right decision. Protocols existed for a reason. I'd saved 3 lives by following procedure. The infection vector had been contained. Her words, clinical and clean, didn't change what I'd done. Didn't change that Derek Liu had drowned 70 feet below the surface while I stood on deck and watched it happen. That his body had been transformed into something inhuman while his voice stayed calm and measured, explaining how good it felt to let go. I'd abandoned my friend to the darkness. That was the truth I carried, the one that sat in my chest like a stone, cold and heavy and permanent. The lake kept her secrets, always had. Superior was old and deep and patient, and she'd swallowed more ships, more lives, more mysteries than anyone could count. The Meridian Star was just one more wreck in her collection. But now I kept a secret too. Harper's people had sealed the records, classified the incident. The official report said the salvage operation had been suspended due to equipment failure and hazardous conditions. Derek Liu had died in a diving accident, standard boilerplate, nothing unusual. They'd paid me to stay quiet. Not directly, not in so many words, but the settlement that came with the non-disclosure agreement had been generous enough that I understood the arrangement. Take the money, keep my mouth shut, never speak about what I'd seen or what I knew. I took it. What else was I going to do? So I carried the knowledge alone. The understanding that somewhere beneath Superior's surface, in the flooded corridors of the Meridian Star, Derek wasn't really dead. Not in any way that mattered. His body was still down there, transformed, adapted, waiting. And he wasn't alone. The Meridian Star's crew had gone down with the ship 6 months before I ever arrived. 15 men and women who'd drowned when she sank. Harper had mentioned contamination in the cargo hold, bioweapon exposure, something that survived in the cold water and the crushing pressure. I knew what that meant now. 15 crew members, transformed just like Derek, changed into something that could survive in the depths, that didn't need air or warmth or light, something patient, something waiting. The thought kept me awake more than Derek's voice did. I'd see it in my mind, those flooded corridors, the darkness beyond my helmet lights, the shadows that moved wrong. I'd remember the figure I'd glimpsed through the cargo hold entrance, human-shaped but not human anymore. They were down there, all of them. The Meridian Star's crew and Derek adapted to their new existence, living in the wreck like it was home, waiting. I tried to convince myself it didn't matter. The Meridian Star was off limits now. Harper's people had made sure of that. No salvage company would touch her. The coordinates were flagged, the site was restricted, and anyone who tried to get close would face the kind of federal response that ended careers. But I knew better. Knew how the industry worked, how bureaucracy moved slow and memory moved slower, how regulations got forgotten, how restricted sites got declassified, how time and budget cuts and changing priorities meant that eventually someone would decide the Meridian Star wasn't dangerous anymore. 5 years, maybe 10. Long enough for Harper to retire, for new administrators to take over, for the incident to become a footnote in some database that nobody checked, And then another salvage company would get the contract. Some outfit that didn't know the history, didn't understand what they were dealing with. They'd send down divers, maybe ROVs first, standard procedure. They'd find the wreck intact, cargo secured, everything looking clean and professional. They'd think it was an easy job. I'd thought the same thing. I remembered standing on the Iron Promise's deck that first morning, coffee steaming in the cold air, watching Derek suit up with that easy confidence I'd trusted for 6 years. I dismissed Harper's warnings as paranoia, bureaucratic overcaution, the kind of nonsense that government people invented to justify their jobs. The rules had seemed excessive. The protocols had felt like theater. I'd been so sure I knew better. And Derek had paid for my certainty with his humanity. So yeah, I knew. Knew that somewhere down the line another captain would make the same mistake I did, would think the warnings were overblown, would trust their experience over procedures they didn't understand, would send their crew into the depths because the job looked straightforward and the money was good. They'd ignore the rules just like I had, and the transformed crew of the Meridian Star would be waiting for them. Patient, adapted, ready. The lake would claim more victims. The infection would spread. More divers would hear that calm voice explaining how the cold didn't hurt, how the pressure felt good, how the depths offered something worth surrendering to. I couldn't stop it. Couldn't warn anyone without breaking the non-disclosure agreement. Couldn't speak up without risking everything Harper's people had paid me to forget. All I could do was carry the weight of what I'd witnessed and what I'd done. The knowledge that I'd helped create what waited below. That somewhere in Superior's darkness, Derek and the others existed in a state I couldn't comprehend, transformed beyond recognition, but still aware enough to speak, to move, to wait. I lived with that weight every day, woke up with it, went to sleep with it, carried it through the hours in between. Some burdens you couldn't put down, some truths you couldn't share. This was mine. And when the next salvage operation came, because it would come eventually, inevitably, I'd hear about it. Some mention in industry news, some passing comment from someone who still worked the lakes. I'd know what was about to happen, and I'd keep my mouth shut, just like I'd been paid to do. Because the lake kept her secrets, and I kept mine. And that was how it worked when you survived something that shouldn't exist. That was the cost of walking away alive.